everyone, welcome to this session on management of COVID-19. I am Dr. Mauna BM. I would like to thank my preceptor Dr. Animesh Ray. Firstly, we will see how to categorize patients with COVID-19. What are the treatment options available? When do we discharge the patient? And finally, few points about various investigational approaches. Who requires hospital admission? If the patient has any one of the 5 criteria, that is respiratory rate of more than 24 cycles per minute, saturation of less than 94% on room air, if the patient is confused or drowsy, or if the BP is less than 90 by 60 millimeters mercury. In the absence of 4 features, mild or a moderate case may also require hospital admission if they are at high risk for severe disease. Now, who is at high risk for severe disease? Age more than 60 years, cardiovascular risk factors including hypertension, diabetes mellitus, or other immunocompromised states. Chronic lung, liver, kidney disease also require hospital admission. However, the final decision to admit the patient is at the discretion of treating physician. Now, how do we manage a mild case? We basically give symptomatic treatment, that is, antitussives for cough, paracetamol for fever. Hydroxychloroquine and vitamin C may be considered. If clinically indicated, antibiotics and oseltamivir may be added. Most of the mild cases may be isolated at home. However, if the patient is at high risk for severe disease, then they may require hospital admission. Patients who are advised home isolation need to take appropriate home isolation precautions. They should be warned of danger signs like shortness of breath, hemoptysis, or altered mental status. If any occurs, they need to visit the nearest health center or call the helpline number. How do we manage a moderate or a severe case? Apart from symptomatic treatment, we need to give them supportive care like oxygen therapy to maintain saturation between 92 and 96%. If they need a face mask, then non-rebreathing face mask is preferred. What is the role of NIV in mild respiratory failure? It may be used, but however, as NIV is a aerosol generating procedure, so better to avoid it. Conservative fluid management may be considered in the absence of hypotension and if the patient is hemodynamically stable. Most importantly, close monitoring for worsening clinical status plays a vital role in the management of the patient. In case of sepsis, after drawing blood for blood culture, empirical antibiotics are started. If clinically bronchodilators are needed, then MDI is preferred over nebulization again to prevent aerosolization. Let's see the role of awake self-proning. Awake self-proning, as we can see here, as compared to reclined position, proning will improve ventilation and perfusion of posterior lobes, thereby improving saturation. Increasing evidence in UK has shown that it not just improves saturation, it may also reduce ICU admissions. Here, an individual will be prone for 4 continuous hours with 1 hour comfort breaks. So how is this done? Here, the individual is prone with head end elevated by at least 30 degrees. 1 pillow is placed below the head and the shin, 2 pillows below the chest and the pelvis, making sure that abdomen is not compressed too much. This is how it is done, and head should be turned towards right or left according to the comfort of the patient. But before considering awake self-proning, we have to look for absolute and relative contraindications. If any of these features are present, then we do not advise awake self-proning. Coming to specific therapy. As per current data, there is no specific therapy available. However, based on registered trials and in vitro data, the drugs that may be considered are as follows. Firstly, hydroxychloroquine in a dose of 400 mg twice a day for day 1, followed by 200 mg twice a day for 4 days. So few points about hydroxychloroquine. As we all know, it is an anti-malarial 4-aminoquinoline which is shown to have in vitro but not yet in vivo action against SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2 virus. It is thought to act via multiple mechanisms of actions. It inhibits the entry of virus into the cell. By inhibiting glycosylation of the host receptors, proteolytic processing, it also inhibits acidification of endolysosome, thereby reducing viral infectivity. It also has immunomodulatory action by inhibiting the release of cytokines, autophagy, and lysosomal activity within the cells. There's an expert consensus group in China who say that hydroxychloroquine improved lung imaging and shortened the disease course as well. And they have included HCQ in the treatment guidelines. With respect to chloroquine, HCQ is found to be more potent against SARS-CoV-2 virus, at least in vitro studies. So when do we use it? We use HCQ if the patient requires supplemental oxygen or if the patient is at high risk for severe disease. But after starting the patient on HCQ, we need to look for side effects. Adverse effects like bone marrow suppression, cardiomyopathy, retinopathy are long-term and dose-dependent side effects, may not be of concern in COVID-19. But QT segment prolongation is an important side effect. ACC provides HCQ risk assessment scoring as well as guidelines to monitor these patients on HCQ. Here we get a baseline ECG done and a second ECG 3.5 hours after the first dose, thereafter daily. We have to discontinue all other QT prolonging agents. If the baseline ECG shows a prolonged QTC or bundle branch block, better to avoid it. If the ECG is showing frequent VPCs, discontinue the drug. The second drug that is being considered is azithromycin. This is a macrolide antibiotic. This has no evidence of direct action in SARS-CoV-2 virus. The theoretical benefit is thought to be due to its anti-inflammatory actions. The risk of combination, that is azithromycin with HCQ, the risk outweigh the potential benefits, so better to avoid the combination treatment. If azithromycin is used for any other indication, for example, atypical cover and community acquired pneumonia, we need to closely monitor for side effects as well as toxicity. So till now we saw how to manage a hospitalized patient. So when does a patient require ICU care? Those patients requiring mechanical ventilation, hypotension requiring vasopressor support, worsening mental status, or in the presence of multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. Now, when does a patient require mechanical ventilation? If the patient is in moderate to severe ERDS with a PF ratio of less than 200, or if the PF ratio is less than 300, but with hypotension requiring vasopressor support, or if the GCS is less than 8 with threatened airway, the final decision to intubate the patient is again at the discretion of treating physician. How do we care for ventilated patient? A fresh ventilator circuit is used for every new patient. Tubings and HME to be changed every 48 hourly or when it is visibly soiled. Use closed suctioning and avoid routine suctioning. Sedation and muscle relaxants may be used in difficult to ventilate patients. As these patients will be in ERDS, ventilation is to be done as per ARDS.net protocol. Otherwise, a supportive treatment for critically ill patients like head and elevation, oral hygiene, glycemic control, ulcer and thromboprophylaxis, catheter care, bedsore prevention to be done as usual. So even after symptomatic and supportive management and ICU care, if the patient is still progressively worsening, what are the other treatment options that may be considered? Firstly, let's see the role of systemic corticosteroids. The data on steroids with respect to COVID-19 is mixed. In fact, many studies have shown negative effect of steroids on similar viruses. It is not routinely recommended unless it is a part of clinical trial or if it is indicated for any other indication like asthma or COPD exacerbation where we use lowest dose possible for shortest duration. Or if the patient is in shock with a history of chronic steroid use in a dose of 10 mg prednisolone per day or more. Or if the patient is in shock requiring more than 2 vasopressors, then steroids are added. In severe cases, we may consider IV methylprednisolone in a dose of 1 to 2 mg per kg per day for 5 to 7 days in 2 divided doses. So if the patient is still worsening, what are the other treatment options available? Anti-interleukin 6 agents can be used, especially when interleukin 6 levels are more than 5 times the upper limit normal, or convalescent plasma is another option. So when the virus is released from the cell, there will be release of cytokines like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF alpha as well. Studies have shown that interleukin 6 levels correlate with the severity of COVID-19. Thereby, by using anti-interleukin 6 agents like tocilizumab, cetuximab, sarilumumab, and preventing the T-cell activation, it may be protective in COVID-19. Again, it is not routinely used in all patients unless it is a part of clinical trial or in severe cases of COVID-19, and that too with caution, as it may increase the risk of severe bacterial infection. Convalescent plasma is another option in severe cases. So what is convalescent plasma? This is nothing but plasma from an individual who has recovered from an infection. That means you're providing antibodies to provide passive immunity to the patient and hoping that there'll be some clinical response till the host's active immune response takes over. Evidence from SARS-CoV epidemic has shown that use of convalescent plasma decreases the mortality and hospital stay with no major complication, especially when used within 2 weeks of the onset of symptoms. And the MERS 2012 outbreak evidence from animal models also found to be beneficial. The data regarding the use of convalescent plasma may be accessed using this link. Another project called COVID-19 Convalescent Plasma Project. On the other hand, if the patient is clinically improving, when do we decide to discharge the patient? After resolution of symptoms, radiological improvement with a documented virological clearance in 2 samples at least 24 hours apart. Currently, there are more than 300 studies being conducted in this field. To make it easier to understand and remember, the various investigational approaches can be classified as agents acting on the virus directly and agents targeting the host immune response. Firstly, let's see the agent targeting the virus. So this is the life cycle of SARS-CoV-2 virus. So here we can see the S protein, that is spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 virus, via which it will bind to angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors which are present on respiratory epithelium. After it is bound to ACE2 receptors, their entry is further facilitated by a serine transmembrane protease called TMPRSS2. The entry inhibitors which are being studied are S protein inhibitor called grifixin, TMPRSS2 inhibitor called camoside mesylate, agents targeting the interaction between S protein and ACE2 receptor called as umifenovir, membrane fusion and endocytosis inhibitor chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. The viral genome will code for 4 enzymes, that is papain-like protease, 3 chymotrypsin-like protease, helicase, RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. Agents targeting RNA-dependent RNA polymerase are remdesivir, galidesivir, favipiravir, ribavirin. Protease inhibitor, that is especially thought to act on 3 chymotrypsin-like protease, that is lopinavir, ritonavir, is also being studied. Now coming to agents targeting the host immune response. Systemic glucocorticoids, hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, azithromycin, which have immunomodulatory action, interleukin-6 pathway inhibitors, convalescent plasma, nitazoxanide, tradipitant, that is neurokinin-1 receptor antagonist, few of which has already been described. This is a summary of what we studied till now. This flowchart shows how to manage a patient admitted in ward and in the ICU. What do we do if the patient is progressively worsening? And on the other hand, if there is clinical response, when do we discharge the patient? So we know that there is no definitive treatment available for SARS-CoV-2 virus. So prevention is the key. Stay at home and take necessary precautions.